Hello and welcome to Paths to Power, episode 26. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
And Ivan is some slave driver because last week I was saying, I'm going on my holidays, let's take a week off. And he was absolutely insistent that we had to do another Paths to Power this week. And then over the weekend, he relented. He took mercy on me and said, have your week off, showing that Ivan actually has a heart after all. Until Tuesday morning, and my phone starts pinging, and it's Ivan. We have to do one this week. Eamon Ryan has resigned as leader of the Green Party, and soft as I am, I acquiesced to Ivan's desire to talk about Eamon Ryan. What do you want to say about Eamon Ryan, Ivan?
Well, first of all, you alluded to the fact that you might have been on the putting green. My understanding from my spies in wherever it is in the sunspot, flesh spot you are, that Aileen was putting cream into the centre of your back that you can't reach yourself and having another cocktail. But no, I always sense after an election, it happened in the referendums this year, that there's unanticipated fallout. It just creates a watershed moment for people to do things. So, obviously, one would take the view that Eamon Ryan had done 2 terms in government. He's in politics as a councillor since 1995. He's 61 in this month in July, and therefore it was always possible. But put it like this, I think it did take Green people by surprise. He told his inner circle, but insofar as that, first up, it was a huge boost to Fine Gael when Leo stepped down. I think the exact opposite will happen here with the Greens. So, first of all, I think that they are facing into a really bad situation. Number one, because there was a coronation with Simon Harris, there will be a contest now, which we'll come to in a moment. But in fairness to Eamon, I always believe we should take a moment to reflect on his time and what he's achieved. And put it like this. The first thing I would say about him is I text some of his closest friends and they said his greatest quality was to see the good in everybody, and his greatest ability was to garner a consensus. And there were particular moments like the formation of this present government with the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael where he actually drove a bargain, but a very good bargain for 3 ministers and junior ministers, and the programme for government really implementing all his green agenda. So, and also people refer to COP27 when he actually rallied all the EU side together to get a deal. So put it like this, that is the good side. The bad side is for some time now, I have found in his present incarnation over the last 4 years, he has been ineffective. He's had too big a portfolio between transport, communications, energy, the environment, climate change. You know, he actually wasn't turning up to conferences that were vital that he attended because he was spread too thin on the ground. And to be honest with you, he kind of was too high level insofar as that he thought once he made a pronouncement about floating offshore wind that it would happen. In reality, if you look at the critical delivery point on the green agenda, it is to get to 80% green electricity, which, when you take out solar, is really about wind onshore and offshore. And I have to say, I don't think he even picked up the phone to the Custom House to say, look, we're really going to have to sort out county development plans on Board Planola and judicial reviews. And to that extent, he has been most ineffective. Whereas in his previous time as Minister for Energy, a lot of the wind farms we have today right across the country can be attributed to him. So I think he was a declining influence, and it'll be very interesting to see how this emerges. But the reality is Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil were and are about to show the Greens the door.
Well, Ivan, there's the beauty of the two of us working from remote locations, because that was the longest soliloquy you've ever actually managed on this particular podcast when we're not interrupting each other. Okay, let me have a go at Eamon Ryan. When you think about it, how he managed a political comeback is very impressive. He was a member of the government between 2007, 2011. the first Fianna Fáil Green coalition. We all know how that worked out. And the Greens were the ones who got punished more than Fianna Fáil in the 2011 general election. Perhaps unfairly when you consider that the policies that brought the country to ruin back then were Fianna Fáil policies that the Greens ended up at the tail end of being part of. So maybe they were unfortunate as well as being treated particularly badly by the electorate in 2011. Whatever the case, it looked like the day for the Greens was done. And he did a remarkable job in rebuilding the party as successor to John Gormley. It missed out narrowly on a European Parliament seat in 2014, but showed that he had the resilience. And then, having moved constituency into John Gormley's old constituency, took the seat in Dublin Base out in 2016 and continued to build up the Greens, a very successful 2019 local elections and European Parliament. And then we had a very successful general election in 2020, when the Greens seemed to be catching the wave that there was a big new interest, particularly amongst young people, in politics facing up to environmental issues, and a belief that we needed a green agenda. And it has been interesting in that much of the green agenda has been pushed upon us by the European Union as well, and has been agreed by the other parties, that the various things that have to be implemented actually agreed by all the political parties as a need to get our emissions reduced. And yet, what has been very interesting in the last couple of years is that while the Greens have managed to get some of their agenda across, they have become very much the target for opposition parties, and particularly for rural independents, to create this impression, in keeping with some of the rather malign influences of the far right, that the Greens are responsible for a possible diminution of our lifestyles, of requiring us to do things that simply are not what we want to do. And certainly the Greens have struggled in recent times, particularly in relation to things like electric cars and road building, and also retrofitting of homes, that there has been a bit of a backlash against the requirements to do things. And if I were to have criticism of the Greens in one respect, if we're all supposed to be moving to electric cars, why is it that the Greens have been against road building? Because surely the electric cars have to drive on those self-same roads. And while the commitment to public transport is one that deserves to be supported, the reality is that a country like Ireland, we're not going to ever get to the case where the vast majority of people will be able to use public transport and not be driving cars. So in which case, things like, I thought one of the reasons why they got wiped out on Galway City Council recently was because of the opposition to the Galway Ring Road. And this is something that I've interviewed Eamon Ryan about myself. Anyone who's ever been on the existing Ring Road in Galway or going into Galway City knows about the dreadful traffic problems that they have. And those are not going to be sorted out solely by public transport, although more transport is required in that city. You probably do need the outer ring road as well, just like you also need the motorway between Cork and Limerick, which the Greens have been to the forefront of stopping going ahead. So I think there was a number of issues there which have contributed to the Green lack of popularity, but at the same time, some of the approach taken by rural independents to the Greens has been cynical and misleading, I think.
Yeah, speaking to FF and FG government participants with the Greens, I very much sense that it is done. I'll give you some examples. You referred to the Galway Ring Road, the M22 between Cork and Limerick. Road space allocation in Dublin, one-way systems, cycle lanes in city centre, deliveries are going to be disrupted. We then have the huge row about data centres. Eamon Ryan doesn't want any more data centres.
Sorry, just before you go to the data centres, which I'm very interested in as well, the whole Dublin city parking issues, which are going to really kick off from August, are not just a Green Party initiative or a Green Party agenda. This is something that was agreed upon by Dublin City Council, by the other parties as well. Sometimes it's very convenient for the other parties to blame the Greens for the things that they've all signed up to as well, such as, for example, all the climate emission reductions, the 51% reduction by 2030, which is most unlikely to be met, is not simply something that was foisted upon the government or the Dáil by the Green Party. It's something that was agreed by nearly all of the parties.
Yeah, but there's no doubt the catalyst for change is coming from the Greens. I'd also cite something we've talked about before, the cap on Dublin Airport of 32 million passengers. That is driven by the Greens. And most Fianna Fáil people you speak to say, look, it is just nonsensical. So what I'm saying is, and in fairness, the one thing where I think he has made an input in this government is in relation to investment in public transport, frequency, capacity, the extension of the electrification of the dark lines and the commuter lines, bus connects. He has driven it forward and reduced fares. And in fairness to him, we are in a golden era of public transport, in my opinion. But people are telling me, leaving aside the specific points of policy difficulties in relation to car users and farmers, and senior people in government have said to me how capricious the Greens are, how erratic they are. You ask them a question about something, can we go ahead with this port development? And they say on a Monday, yes, and on Friday, no. That they are just impossible to deal with, and frustration is growing with them, that they don't know themselves on points of granular detail what they're doing. So my central point is they are facing a real difficulty. But as always, when someone moves aside, opportunity opens up. So where we are now is Monday.
Sorry, just before we go to where we are now, and we do need to go back to data centres as well, just would like to say something in relation to Dublin Airport, because the Dublin Airport story is very interesting. The 32 million passenger cap has nothing to do with carbon emissions or the number of flights going into or out of the airport. It's actually down to road traffic access. It was something set down by the local council many years ago during previous expansion in relation to Terminal 2 and a lack of road access, which can be dealt with. So there is a very fair argument to be said that it is somewhat disingenuous to be placing a cap on the number of flights in and out of Dublin Airport as an environmental issue when it's actually a road access issue. And that realistically, we should actually probably be allowing that cap to be lifted. However, there is also the strong argument that maybe flights should be diverted to Cork and to Shannon for more regional development and even for tourism. Not everything has to be Dublin centred, which was something that the Greens have been arguing in relation to that. And one other point in relation to Dublin Airport. Last week, I was praising Michael O'Leary for paying his taxes in Ireland, although I do want to apologise to a few people who have been in touch who weren't happy with the language that I used at the end of the show. So I won't be repeating that again. That's a fine for a four-letter word that goes alongside your use of the word woke. But I thought Michael O'Leary showed his true colours this week in the taunting manner in which social media went after Eamon Ryan, a lack of respect for the man's achievements in government and his dedication to public service, and the idea that the social media network at Ryanair does anything without Michael O'Leary's express permission is nonsense. He would have fully known and would have approved the stuff that they came up with, going back to the unfortunate time when Eamon Ryan fell asleep in the convention centre. And I thought it was the usual nasty, cheap shot out of Michael O'Leary and Ryanair, which does him no credit. And in relation to, that time when Eamon Ryan did fall asleep, which has become something of a meme, I think a few times we're a little bit harsh on some of our politicians, and he made reference himself in his resignation speech to the fact that he has a son who has additional needs, considerable additional needs as it happens. And I suspect there are times when it's been very, very difficult for the Ryan family, for the time that he's needed to travel and for the time that he's been away on business and still tending to home life as well. And the sort of cheap shots that some people have taken because whatever, maybe he had a brief nap inside in the Dáil, he was a guy who was very much awake to and alive to the issues that he believed in and worked hard on, whether you agreed with them or not. Data centers is a really interesting one because an awful lot of the improvements that we need to make to deal with climate change are going to be data and internet driven. And the reality is that the data centers are required to deal with all the various storage issues, and they're very, very important. And it's better that we do them in Ireland than we do them in other parts of the world if you look in a global scale. Just like I would argue that I would have sympathy for the beef farmers, because what's the point in reducing the size of our beef output in this country and our dairy output if instead it just provides an opportunity for Brazilian farmers to do more with more damage to the environment than we would be doing here in Ireland?
Just in response to that, while the Dublin airport issue is a localised planning issue and services and capacity, when the debate erupted, it was the Greens and Eamon Ryan and Kieran Cuff who actually said the cap should stay. And, you know, this nonsense of saying that we should drive traffic to Cork and Limerick, you'll actually drive it to Paris and London instead. The issue with the Greens is it's reached a point, and after the wipeout in the local elections when they went from 49 to 23 councillors and no MEP, people have said to me, it's like driving a car with the handbrake on, being in government with the Greens. They are very aligned to An Taisce. They're first up in the queue to object to planning applications for a whole variety of vital infrastructure. So as far as I'm concerned, the Greens are done. So where we are now in terms of the vacancy, this is really interesting. The closing time for nominations, and anyone who can get 50 signatures is eligible to stand. We have Senator Pippa Hackett with the support of Oisin Smith, which is significant. First woman leader, and in line with Holly Cairns and Ivana Bacek, would be populist thing to do. Her selling point is that she's from Offaly, she's from an organic farm, and that she will change the narrative of the Greens just being city-based. However, while the public may think Pippa's going to win, the reality is, if I was to say to you in Fine Gael Labour, Fianna Fáil, that the leader of a party would not be a TD is just unthinkable. And I think everything favours Roderick O'Gorman from the insider's point of view. And a lot of people tell me the near-death experience where they had no TDs after 2011 that you described, that Roderick O'Gorman was the man who masterminded all those seats. The other thing I would say about Roderick is that two of his vital local councillors in West Dublin lost their council seats. So every way I look at it, the one consensus that I'm hearing from everyone when I was trying to assess the fallout of the elections and whether Sinn Féin and the difference between these elections and the general election, everyone was of the view that the Greens, like the biodiversity crises, are another species that are endangered.
Okay, the leadership race or contest is very interesting. There are some people suggesting it might be something of a Potemkin contest in the sense that they know that Pippa Hackett is not going to win, but it serves them to have a contest where they have a rural politician going up against an urban one to show that the Greens are rural and care about rural Ireland, and that they can actually get some publicity by having a contest where both of the candidates would be heard on the airwaves. And there's a certain logic to that. There's a belief that Pippa Hackett would not make sense because she's in a 3-seater constituency and she's most unlikely to win a seat at the general election. Although that said, her chances of winning a seat would be improved by being a party leader and by being an outgoing minister, because presumably she would step up into the senior ministerial ranks rather than being the super junior. In relation to Roderick O'Gorman, though, do the Greens want to be associated with somebody who was responsible for the failed referendum campaigns? Remember, that was his thing. So that's not something that will be very good for him to be campaigning as leader of the Green Party going into a general election on. And also that he is the Minister for Integration, who is the most readily associated with immigration. So all around the country, as Rodrigo Gorman, rather than Eamon Ryan, would be the party leader, surely he would be hammered for the perceived failings in relation to that. A lightning rod for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I'm interested in what you say, because it's quite clear that what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are going to try and do is blame the Greens for everything that might have gone wrong during the lifetime of the government. Very, very useful. So the whole country would almost be against the Greens. So joining the rural independents and the like, and Sinn Féin, who had their kick off the Greens in the last week as well, would be the political parties alongside them. So you sort of wonder, is there anybody in the Greens beyond those two who would actually come true? So I think they're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, to be honest. I think there's no realistic prospect for them of having somebody who's going to be universally popular.
The other thing that is very interesting at this, and this might speak to your strategy of an urban-rural sort of script, Catherine Martin is not standing as deputy leader, so Pippa Hackett could stand as deputy leader. That requires a plebiscite amongst the members as well. And the interesting thing there is the Greens have a constitutional rule that says after every general election, no matter what the result, they have to have a leadership contest. So Catherine Martin might be waiting in the long grass saying, look, I'm one of the few who could get re-elected here. I'll let this pass now and make a move after that. The other thing, on a lighter note, I would just say, I'm surprised something like the celebrity program with Anton Deck, Get Me Out of Here in the Jungle, is not something you watch. I enjoy that. I'm a chav myself. I kind of enjoy that kind of frippery. And they have a point whereby they elect or a king or a queen for a week. And the first task of the king or queen is to give out all the jobs. So some people have to do the cooking and some people have to do the washing up. And the worst job of all is to do the dunny. In simple terms, to shovel the shit. So basically, what happens is this, that I actually thought when I was thinking about Rodrigo Gorman, it's actually analogous. When it came to the refugee housing and accommodation issue, you could say, well, that should go to the Department of Housing because they deal with social housing and homelessness and so on. Or it should go to the Department of Justice, who are responsible for migration numbers. But it's like the dunny and the allocation. They gave it to Rodrigo Gorman. It was because it was the worst job in government and he has suffered greatly from it. So I actually see disunity ahead in the party. I see them being a punch bag for every other part of the political spectrum. And I would say that you could either have somewhere between 0 and 2 Greens elected at the next general election, which I have to say is now almost certainly, although Harris got up last night at the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party and said, really pushed back talk about a general election and said that we must all say this is nonsense and we're sticking to the knitting and all this. I think a decision has been taken at the highest level that they'll be calling elections straight after the budget, and it's now certain to happen.
Yes, okay. So a couple of things there. I'm interested in hearing, because you're back in Dublin, I'm not, who's likely to be the government ministers that the Greens would nominate? Because presumably Eamon Ryan will leave that enormous position behind. Would the new leader want to keep Catherine Martin in the cabinet? Might it be a good idea to have somebody else deal with the RT debacle, for example? And would it just be simply a case of Pippa Hackett moving into Eamon Ryan's position in the cabinet if Rodrigo Gorman becomes the leader? Who else then from the Greens would get promoted into the Super Junior position? There's quite a bit there, I'd imagine, that both Simon Harris and Micheál Martin are looking at with a degree of interest. And the other thing that would be of interest to me is who's going to replace Eamon Ryan in the Dublin-based South constituency? Because in the last by-election, which Ivana Bacik won, Claire Byrne was run rather than Hazel Chu. Now, both Hazel Chu and Claire Byrne won their seats as councillors again in the recent local election. Both of them are very highly able, very good candidates. They're very impressive when you listen to them, very committed to what they do. But I wonder, Hazel Chu would be very interesting if she was to run on the basis that she has been subjected to the type of social media outrage of the fact that Eamon Ryan complained of when he was going as well. She has been subjected to horrific racist abuse. And you wonder, would she put herself forward in a general election? I suspect she would, because I think she's a very brave individual in the way she's faced an awful lot of this racism. But apart from that, Claire Byrne, not to be confused with your friend, the RTE broadcaster, is also a very, very extremely able politician. So will either of them be able to fill the Eamon Ryan shoes and win a seat?
Well, first of all, I think if Eamon had any say in it, it would be Claire Byrne, not Hazel Chu. Interesting, would Hazel Chu run as an independent if she didn't get the nod? The person who was most gushing in the Dáil about the departure of Eamon Ryan was the biggest winner, which is Ivana Bacik, because this really consolidates her prospects of re-election, which were dodgy, especially if Michael McDowell runs. No, there will be a lot of speculation, but I would say the person to watch in terms of promotion to the cabinet is Oisin Smith. They didn't do too badly in Dunleary. They did much worse in other areas. He is seen as perhaps a kingmaker, certainly if Pippa Hackett makes it, that will be the case. But obviously the other person that might be in the frame, if they wanted someone out of Dublin, would be Malcolm Noonan, who is a junior minister in the Department of Heritage, and he might get the bump up there. But this is deck chairs on the Titanic, Max. Make no mistake about it. The Greens, in terms of 2024 and where they're going, their star will decline under a new leader. They'll be more divided. People will be watching the post-election situation. The Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael feel they can get a 3% bump without them. They, as you say, they will be a lightning rod for everything that's been unpopular. And the pushback against sustainability is pretty endemic. I do work with the motor industry, the SIMI, and with the farmers and so on. And the first thing is, if you're talking about politics, when is someone going to have a march on the Dáil and burn an effigy of Eamon Ryan? And the vitriol against him in some of those sectors is very pronounced. Because, Matt, and I know in your ivory tower you wouldn't feel this, but they feel their livelihood is endangered.
We have been examining the Greens in detail, but also this week we had the promotion of Jack Chambers to be the deputy leader of Fianna Fáil, which doesn't come as a surprise to me, Ivan, because you know that I have been saying on this podcast, going back to the early days, that I would sort of see him as a likely successor to Micheál Martin, but that putting him in as deputy leader means that Micheál Martin is saying, go and serve your apprenticeship for a number of years. I'm not going anywhere for a good few years yet. But it does make me also wonder, is it anything to do with the EU Commissioner's job and the possibility that Michael McGrath is going to take it, that maybe they'll find a way for him to deliver the budget and then take the Commissioner's job? Or could it be that Jack Chambers, as Deputy Leader, will be put in as Minister for Finance? Or could it be that Darragh O'Brien becomes Minister for Finance, as some people were speculating? I wonder about that, because I wonder about the optics of moving him out of the Department of Housing before the general election, that they would want to keep him there and that they would want to say that he has boosted the output of construction considerably rather than moving him into finance. Or do they see him as a guy, perhaps in a run-up to a general election, to be a guy who would take on Pearse Doherty on economic debates in the run-up to a general election? So you tell me from your sources what's going on.
First of all, you that live in the Twitter space and X zone, there was quite a kerfuffle yesterday. Gavin Riley put out a tweet to say that on the plinth, Micheál was holding a press conference, and when the press officer Siobhan was asked what was it about, it was about leadership. And people said, OMG, is he going to resign as well? Of course, when the journalist put that to him in a kind of frivolous way, he said, you've been writing me off for the last 10 years. He took great pleasure in saying this. So the fact of the matter is, it's clever politics again. Dublin, Cork, Access, always a good idea. Next Generation shows all other putative leaders, you know what I mean? I have my own plans to stick around here. Jack was the director of elections for the local elections. I actually find when I put it to people in Fianna Fáil, I'm hearing a lot that McGrath now is interested in taking the commissionership. Could he get it? They just go stum. I'm told that Micheál Martin hasn't even told Deirdre Gillan his thinking in relation to the commissionership. He's keeping it very, very tight. But if he was to get it, I'm hearing that Darragh would. Darragh wants out of the Custom House. He's done his bit there, and Housing for All was his big play. He has got 100,000 houses built, and someone else maybe after the Housing Commission report needs to bring it to the next level. So I think that is a real prospect, and McGrath wanting it actually creates a good Cork South Central access, because if there's any little pressure on the Fianna Fáil vote, it secures and consolidates Micheál's position, which is not in jeopardy. So put it like this, I think that there will be further repercussions. I think he's got to make a decision on the nomination by the second week of July, because all the good, it now looks like Esther van der Linde might get it, that she'll be filling her portfolios. And from Ireland's point of view, you need to get a decent, vice presidency perhaps of the Commission and a proper portfolio, of which there's only about 4 or 5.
And when it comes to van der Leyen, she may look for a male and a female nominee like she did the last time that she picks from. So we could end up in a situation where the government is really stuck when it comes to actually finding somebody, a female, to nominate alongside Michael McGrath. And Michael McGrath, I presume, is not going to resign as Minister for Finance unless he's guaranteed the position of Commissioner, rather than her making a decision of one from two. Also, we say about shoring up the position of Cork South Central. I remember I told you about a month or so back that Shamey, the brother, was very interested in running for the general election, that there was rumours of a deal between the two brothers. Well, he had one of the outstanding local election performances recently, had an enormous vote in what is just a part of the Cork South Central constituency. So I think the belief would be that he and Micheál Martin would easily take 2 seats for Fianna Fáil there, so they don't have to worry about losing the seat if Michael McGrath goes. It would be interesting, the dynamic with Paschal Donoghue has actually worked very well. Whether Darragh O'Brien or Jack Chambers, and I take your point about Darragh O'Brien, would have the same dynamic with Paschal Donoghue and have the same perhaps intellect to apply to the role of Minister for Finance. But if we're going into an election, it'd be very much a political decision. It does actually bring up the issue as well, though. I see the Governor of the Central Bank has written to the government, and the twice annual letter is concerned about what's going to happen in the budget. The Irish Fiscal Advisory Council recently had yet its latest appeal to the government to behave itself when it comes to spending in the budget. And if, as you say, and I entirely concur, that it's almost certain that we're going to get a general election before the end of October with an earlier budget, and that they'll go to the country on the basis of the budget, just how much of a giveaway budget is it actually likely to be? I mean, what can they actually do, given that there is a commitment to putting about 6 billion into a savings fund, that they're supposed to stay within a 5% spending limit as well? Will the government go to the country on the basis of a big giveaway budget, or will it try and say, look, we're prudent people who will use your money properly, rather than Sinn Féin promising to spend money on everything? What's likely to happen?
Well, I think there definitely is a sharpening of the edge in terms of sweeteners at constituency level. One of the things that people who lost their seats are complaining about is that incumbent councillors were throwing around money to community groups for barbecues during the summer and all of these goodies to buy votes. This is now starting at a government level. I was listening on Southeast Radio to Stephen Donnelly saying how proud and delighted he was to announce an extension to Wexford Hospital, and went into all the things at the extra staffing and so on. I think they have decided to go green for go on announcements all over the place on capital projects, and they're going to really go for that populist politics of getting the constituents' snout in the trough and just delivering. Matt, every week you say that we want to thank you for sending in your emails, mail@pathtopowerpodcast, all one word.com. Unlike you, I actually go to read out some of the emails now, insofar as they're never read out in the last 3 months that I can remember. Hi, fellas. Just writing to ask if the recent announcement of Holly Cairns' pregnancy has given Ivan an excuse to change his prediction again for the general election date, as the government may target Holly's maternity leave to give them the best chance possible. Thanks for the podcast. Love the arguing, says Robert. Well, first of all, I've never changed my mind on the 15th of November, right back from the start of this podcast. But then they get more waspish as it goes on. Basically, this is from a very enthused listener. You know, when they're anonymous, they really do go too far. Dear Ivan and Matt, a moment must be given to reflect on Ivan's predictions from Eddie Punch in South to 300 independents to Helen O'Donnell. My tip would be for Ivan to keep his money in his wallet. Aside from the implications now of by-elections, there's also the question of Regina Doherty's Shannon seat. What are your thoughts? Kate O'Connell, perhaps, and what implications would this have on Dublin Bay South? So 2 things about that. I never predicted that Eddie would win a seat. I said he would make a good showing. He got over 25,000 votes, which I call a good show. I predicted that Michael Mara would get the seat. Yeah, we discussed the independence thing last week and Helen O'Donnell. But you're forgetting, my friend, that I nailed what was going to happen to the Greens. Now, that is an interesting question, though. So, Regina is a Taoiseach's nominee. And so, therefore, it's in the gift after the 13th of July when Regina becomes an MEP. So the story here is that Noel Rock, the defeated candidate in central Dublin, is looking for the gig and has a good case, because it would be the difference between him standing and not standing. But the word on the street is that the only person who actually committed to rejoining Fine Gael and recommitting to Fine Gael was Kate O'Connell. She is Simon's biggest cheerleader, and she is going to be added, I think, as a senator and as leader of the Senate, and she is going to be added to the Fine Gael ticket with Gagan in Dublin Bay South, which is your own constituency, the richest in the country.
Now, I have to say, I'm amused to hear that you're so committed to the texts and emails that come in from our listeners, given that I'm the one who forwarded all those questions to you to read out, and that you wouldn't even know how to access those email site. So fair play to you on that. And I love the way that you actually come back and say that you predicted the Greens. You also predicted more than 300 independents will be elected in the local elections. So not all of your predictions are your bets come right, do they?
They got almost 30% of the vote, which is a lot more than the 23% the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael got. Another interesting email from Ronan Hickey. Do you think Claire Daly and Mick Wallace would have a chance of getting elected to the door in the next election if they ran? I see Wexford is going down from a 5 to a 4-seater, and Dublin Fingal, currently a 5-seater, being split into 2 3-seaters. Presumably this would make a Dáil run a lot harder. Or more generally, I would imagine the voters in Wexford might not be impressed with Wallace's record in Europe. So the reason Wexford is actually going down in seats is because it's now into 2 constituencies, 4 in the southern part and a new Wicklow-Wexford constituency for with effectively 3 seats. So it's actually gone from a 5-seater to a 6-seater. Mick Wallace and Claire Daly are now out of a job. And what else can they do? Maybe they can work for Putin. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that I think one of their few options remaining is to stand for the Dáil. But I actually don't think they get elected. I think there is a recency bias in politics, out of sight, out of mind. I think their pro-Soviet views cost them their seats. I don't see a way back for them.
Of course, they would deny that they are pro-Soviet. They would say that they are pro-peace. I think it's quite clear that whatever they may feel about the Russians, they're very anti-American. And that might be the worldview that they bring to an awful lot of the contributions that they make. I think the most relevant thing there is the fact that there are fewer seats for them to be able to try and target reduces dramatically the possibility of them getting elected if they were to run for the Dáil. So I want to go back because I want to ask you a little bit about the budget, because We didn't really finish there. What I'm interested in as well, and you say about the spending in local areas, which is a very good point. But sometimes what a budget needs, particularly if you're going into an election, is that big thing that will be given to potential voters. Vote for us because you're getting this. And in the last two budgets, the last budget had about 14 billion euro in additional spending, it's tax cuts. The previous budget had about 11 billion, but it was largely skewed to spending over tax cuts. I wonder if the government will make a significant and noticeable change to the USC as a way in the budget, as a way of trying to attract voters.
Well, two things on that. At the Fianna Fáil Ardèche, they did 2 billion of promises of what would be in the budget. And I don't know how much latitude they have beyond that. That was a change to tax credits going up to personal tax credits to $2,000, the point at which you hit the higher rate, and some modification of the USC. That is quite expensive. I think if they want a bazooka item, I think to do something dramatic on childcare, which isn't that expensive, like 500 or 600 million will go a long way. I think that could be it. But let's be clear. This is a Dutch auction buying votes with our money, not their money. And certainly, if this podcast is going at that point in time, we're still speaking to each other, then I would say that the reality is that we need to call out this disgraceful behaviour. The fact of the matter is that I'm talking to cloud infrastructure people who are making tenure decisions on investment. And when they look at a lot of things here and why there's instability in other areas, and perhaps with the emergence of the centre holding here, there's a prospect of political stability, everything tells me that Ireland is going down the list for FDI going forward because of the data centre issue and the tax playing pitch being levelled. And I really, really am concerned that the vital issue of planning reform is just not on the horizon of political parties. And at the end of the day, you take politics seriously, I regard it as a blood sport. The reality is, if they want to do good for the people and the future standards of living, they really need to deal with these medium-term issues.
Tell us what's the latest in relation to Sinn Féin as you see it, because the party is now very actively engaged in the general election campaign north of the border, which I wonder, has that taken its eye off the ball and in its need to recalibrate and refocus in the south?
Yeah, first of all, it was unhelpful to have the two at the one time, and it didn't allow them to focus, which will be different in the next general election. They will have fire all their guns in the south. A lot of people are looking at the biggest issue in Irish politics is the SF post-mortem and the why. So it varies from the independents ate their lunch. It varies from, look, the Shinners never smile. They're actually snarling, they're nasty, and they misread the national mood. Also, people say that, you know, the change mantra was too superficial. They weren't able to back it up with hard policies. The way I look at the sort of political firmament here, there are 40%, this is on a 60% turnout, there are 40% of the people who for one reason or another are disposed to continuing FFFG in government, the devil you know, the haves and so on. There are 40% who did not turn out to vote. In blue-collar areas, the turnout was 30%. Everyone agrees the Sinn Féin voter stayed at home. Some of them voted independent, some of them voted soft out, but the vast majority stayed home. So there's 40% lurking out there against the government, and there's 20% floating votes undecided. So just go figure how we're going to fill our 174 TDs. I'm still losing sleep over that, Matt, while you're getting the suntan oil rubbed into your back.
Well, I actually think it's a round of golf that I want to go and play now. I suppose the fact I've had to do this podcast is punishment for running up the air miles this week and for eating steak every night and going playing on well-watered golf courses, the type of things that I shouldn't be doing if I was leading a proper environmentally friendly life. Is there anything else that we need to discuss to finish off this week? First,
No, I've been slaving away here, and I've got to go now. And do some more work. So you enjoy the sun, and I'm sure your last word listeners, your readers in the Business Post, the Mail, and all your other clients cannot await a moment longer for your return.
We'll see you next week. So this is the episode of Path to Power that I didn't want to do. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back next week. From me, Matt Cooper.
And for me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for listening.